People often tell you that discipline is hard. That waking up early when you're still sleepy is hard. That turning down a fun outing to sit down and focus on your work is hard. That repeating small actions every day, while not seeing immediate results, is what makes most people give up. And maybe you've believed that too. I did too. I used to sit in a small room, on a morning when I should have started my day earlier. The sunlight had already poured through the window. The clock had already ticked past precious minutes, but I still sat there procrastinating. I told myself, just today, a day to rest, a day to take it easy, a day where I didn't have to try. Sounds harmless, right? But life doesn't change because of big decisions. It changes through small choices repeated over and over again. And the most dangerous thing is not that you're lazy for a day. It's that you start getting used to that laziness. Discipline in reality is like stepping into the gym for the first time. Your body aches. Your mind resists. Everything in you wants to quit. It's uncomfortable. It's unpleasant. And so you think it's the hardest thing. But let me ask you something. What happens if you don't step into that gym for 5 years? What happens if you keep postponing the things you know you should do? What happens if you keep choosing what's easy today and tomorrow and the day after that? There is another kind of pain, slower, quieter, but much deeper. It's the pain of looking back at your life and realizing that you could have become someone else. A better version, stronger, more disciplined. But you didn't. And I want you to understand this. Discipline is hard, yes. But living a life full of regret is much harder. A very small lie, but repeated long enough, it can shape your entire life. I'll do it later. Starting tomorrow isn't too late. I'm not ready yet. Those statements don't make you feel guilty. On the contrary, they make you feel comfortable. Like a warm blanket on a cold morning, it wraps around you and convinces you to stay a little longer. I remember a period in my life when I didn't start my day with action, but with delay. I sat there with a cup of coffee, looking out the window, telling myself I was mentally preparing. But the truth was, I was avoiding starting, avoiding discomfort, avoiding responsibility for my own life. And the dangerous thing is, you don't feel like anything is wrong at all. No one comes knocking on your door and says, "Hey, you're wasting your life." No warning signals go off. No immediate consequences. Just silence. A very comfortable silence. But that very silence is what kills you the slowest. Life doesn't collapse in a single day. It slips away little by little. Every time you choose ease over discipline, you don't see anything change. But if you look back after a year or 5 years, you'll see a gap. Not the gap between you and others, but the gap between who you are today and who you could have been. I once met a man. He wasn't a failure in the way you might think. He had a stable job, a family, a life many would call enough. But in one conversation, he said something I will never forget. "I don't regret failing. I regret that I never truly tried." You see, that's what's truly frightening. It's not that you tried and failed. It's that you never truly tried at all. And the reason is not because you lack ability, but because you believed in a very gentle lie. Discipline is too hard to start today. But what's the truth? You're not avoiding discipline. You're choosing another path, one whose cost you don't fully understand. A path without immediate pain, but one that accumulates another kind of pain, deeper, heavier, and irreversible. I've walked that path for a long time, and I can tell you one thing. It doesn't knock you down right away. It just makes you gradually become average. And the saddest part is you don't even realize it's happening. You still wake up every day, still go to work, still talk, still smile, but inside something is quietly disappearing. It's the better version of you. And by the time you start to feel it, you've already gone too far down the easy path. But that's still not the hardest part, because the real pain of lacking discipline doesn't come loudly. It comes in silence. And we're going to talk about that right now. What most people never realize, the things that truly destroy your life don't do it loudly. They don't come like a storm. They come like fog, quietly, slowly, almost invisibly. I used to think that if my life was going in the wrong direction, I would feel it immediately, that there would be a clear sign, a strong enough impact to wake me up. But no, life doesn't work that way. It doesn't push you down. It just lets you drift, little by little. You don't realize you're falling behind because each day looks exactly like yesterday. You still work, still live, still exist. Nothing is too bad, but nothing gets better either. And that feeling of nothing too bad is the most dangerous trap of all. I remember an old friend. He once told me, "I don't need to try too hard. My life is fine, fine." A word that sounds comfortable. But have you ever thought that fine can also be a trap? Because when you accept fine, you stop growing. You no longer feel the need to wake up earlier. No longer feel the need to learn more. no longer feel the need to become better. You start living a life without pressure, but also without progress. And the strange thing is, you still feel normal. No pain, no crisis, no reason to change. Just time continuing to pass. But time doesn't pass neutrally. It always leaves a mark. Every day you delay, you don't just lose a day, you lose a small part of your potential that you will never get back. Like a piece of metal rusting, it doesn't break immediately. It just weakens little by little, until one day, when you need it the most, it can no longer hold. Life is the same. Lack of discipline doesn't destroy you today. It just makes you a little weaker. No one notices, not even you. You still think you have time. You still think you'll start someday. But someday is a place where many dreams have died. I've been there. I used to believe I could delay today and make up for it tomorrow, that I could live easily now and get serious later. But I was wrong, because you don't build your future on the days you feel ready. You build it on the days you don't want to, but still do. And if you don't do that, then you're not just standing still. You're moving backward, slowly, silently. No one notices, until you look back and ask yourself, why am I still here? That's when the pain begins to appear, not as a big shock, but as a vague feeling hard to name, a slight dissatisfaction, a bit of regret, a question repeating in your mind. Could I have done better? And the answer, you already know it, but you don't want to face it, because when you do, you'll have to admit that you let time pass without truly living up to your potential. And that is the first moment you begin to feel the cost of lacking discipline. But the scary thing is, that's only the beginning, because this pain won't stop there. It will grow. It will become clearer. And one day, it will come to you with no way to ignore it. I still remember that moment very clearly in my life. A moment when everything became so clear that I couldn't look away anymore. And when it comes, it doesn't ask if you're ready. It just appears and changes the way you see yourself forever. There comes a moment in life when you can no longer avoid it. Not because life suddenly becomes terrible, but because you begin to see the truth more clearly than ever before. I remember very clearly one afternoon, many years ago. I was sitting in a small seminar room where men and women were sharing their journeys. At first, nothing special, just familiar stories, working hard, starting from zero, persisting through difficult phases. But then one person stood up. He didn't say much. There were no fancy words. He simply talked about how he spent each day repeating small things that no one saw, waking up early, reading, meeting people, working even when there was no motivation. Very ordinary things, but the results were not ordinary. His life had changed, and as I sat there, listening, a very strange feeling began to appear inside me. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't admiration. It was realization. I realized that the gap between me and him was not talent, not opportunity, but small choices repeated every single day. He chose discipline, and I chose ease. And for the first time in a long time, I could no longer make excuses for myself. No more I'm not ready. No more I'll do it later. No more it's not the right time. Only one very simple truth. I had not done the things I knew I should do, and that hurt, not a sharp pain, but a dull feeling seeping into every thought. You start looking back at the days that have passed, the mornings you slept an extra hour, the times you said tomorrow, the opportunities you passed up just because they weren't comfortable. And all of those things begin to connect, like pieces you had never put together. And when they come together, you see a picture you don't want to see, a version of yourself lower than your true potential. That is the day reality knocks, not gently, not politely, but directly. You can continue living the same way, but you will never be able to say you didn't know. And that's when everything changes. Not that your life changes immediately, but the way you see it does. You start seeing the people around you differently. You see an old friend who started their own business. You see a colleague getting promoted. You see someone who used to be in the same position as you now much further ahead. And that creates a very uncomfortable feeling. Not because they succeeded, but because you know you could have too, but you didn't. That is a very unique kind of pain, because it doesn't come from the outside. It comes from within. It comes from knowing exactly what you have missed. And when that feeling appears, you can no longer return to the carefree state you had before. You can no longer procrastinate comfortably. You can no longer live casually without thinking, because now you have seen the cost. And the ironic thing is, that still isn't the hardest part. Because after you realize it, you will begin to go through something even heavier, not looking at yourself, but looking at others, watching them live the life that you once wanted. And that's where the real pain begins to go deeper. If these things make you think, consider this an invitation, not a demand. Subscribe to the channel so you don't just hear what feels good, but also get reminded of the truths we often avoid. Because sometimes one right perspective, at the right moment, can change the direction of an entire life. And now let's talk about something most people don't want to admit. The feeling of standing there and watching others move forward. There is a kind of silence that only those who have fallen behind understand. It is not the silence of loneliness, but the silence of standing in a room full of people and realizing that everything is moving except you. I remember once meeting a few old friends again. Familiar faces, familiar conversations. But something had changed without anyone needing to say it. Their lives had moved forward. One started a business. Another had just bought their first house. Another was talking about big plans for the future. They weren't showing off. They were simply living. And me, I sat there, listening, nodding, smiling. And inside there was a feeling very hard to describe. Not jealousy. I didn't want them to fail. But it wasn't pure happiness either. It was a void. A void that appears when you realize that you have stood still for too long. You begin to compare, not because you want to, but because you can't help it. You remember the past when everyone started from the same line. No one was ahead, no one was behind. But time does not keep everyone in the same place. It pulls those with discipline upward and leaves those who delay behind. And when you realize that you can no longer pretend you don't see it, I looked at them and I didn't just see who they were now. I saw myself if I had chosen differently, if I had woken up earlier, if I had been more consistent, if I hadn't delayed the important things. My life could have been somewhere else. Do you know what hurts the most? It's not that others succeed. It's that you know you had that ability too, but you didn't use it. That is a very quiet kind of regret. No one sees it. No one says it. But it's there in every glance, every nod, every moment you fall silent when others talk about their achievements. And you begin to feel smaller, not because you are inferior, but because you did not live up to your potential. I once asked myself, how can a person go from potential to average without realizing it? The answer is very simple. Not in one big decision, but in hundreds of small ones. The times you chose to stay instead of stepping out. The times you chose easy instead of right. The times you said, tomorrow, instead of start now. And then one day, you stop comparing yourself to others. You start comparing yourself to your past self. And you realize you did not go as far as you could have. That is a heavy feeling. No noise, no drama, just one thought repeating, I could have done better. And when that thought stays long enough, it is no longer just a thought. It becomes a belief that you missed something important. But the story doesn't end there. Because when you continue living with that gap, another feeling begins to appear. No longer comparison, no longer emptiness, but weight. The weight of the things you did not do. And that is when you begin to understand. Discipline is not the hardest thing. The hardest thing is carrying regret every day, and we are going to talk about that right now. There are things in life you can carry lightly. A small mistake, a stumble, a failure. They hurt in the moment, then pass. But there is one thing that never leaves you. Regret. It is not loud. It does not come like a shock. It just stays there, quietly, growing heavier over time. I used to think the worst thing in life was failure. That if I tried and didn't get what I wanted, that would be the greatest pain. But I was wrong. Failure at least gives you an answer. It tells you that you tried, that you stepped out of your comfort zone, that you lived. But regret, it gives you no answers at all. It only leaves questions. What would have happened if? If I hadn't given up that day, then what? If I had started earlier, would things be different now? Those questions are never answered. And because of that, they become heavier than any failure. I remember once sitting and talking with an older man. He wasn't poor, not lacking. From the outside, his life was stable. But when he spoke, there was something in his eyes that made me pause. Not sadness, not pain, but regret. He told me, I'm no longer afraid of failure. I've lived long enough to understand that failure is just part of life. He paused, then continued. But there are things I never did, and I know I will carry them until the end of my life. You can hear that sentence 100 times, but only when you truly feel it do you understand. Regret doesn't come once. It returns on quiet evenings, in moments when you are alone, when you see others living the life you once dreamed of, It whispers, "You could have." And the most painful part is, you know it's right. You can't blame circumstances. You can't blame others. Because deep down, you know you had the chance. You just didn't take it. And every time you remember, that feeling gets a little heavier, like carrying a backpack that gains another stone each day. At first you don't notice. You still walk, still live, still smile. But gradually, you begin to feel tired, not because you are doing too much, but because you are carrying too much. The things you didn't do, the opportunities you missed, the versions of yourself you never became. And then one day, you realize that the hard part is not waking up early, not working when you don't feel like it. The hard part is living with the feeling that you did not live up to your potential. That is a kind of pain with no cure, because you cannot go back. You cannot return to the days that have passed and say, "This time I will do it differently." Time does not give you that chance. And that is why discipline, even though it is hard, is still a much lighter choice, because it only asks you to pay the price now. Regret makes you pay every day, in silence, in solitude, for the rest of your life. And when you begin to understand that, you will no longer see discipline as a burden. You will see it as an escape. But before you find that escape, there is a stage that most people go through, a stage more dangerous than regret. Not because it hurts more, but because it makes you stop feeling the pain. You get used to it. You begin to live with it. And you call it normal life. There is a state that I believe is more dangerous than failure, and even more frightening than regret. It is when you stop feeling. You are no longer in enough pain to change, but you are also no longer alive enough to move forward. You just exist. I have lived in that state before. No major event. No collapse. Everything looked normal. I still woke up every morning. Still went to work. Still completed what needed to be done. But if you asked me whether that day had any meaning, I wouldn't know how to answer. Because that day was exactly like yesterday. And yesterday was exactly like the day before. Have you ever experienced that feeling? When you look back at a week that just passed and you can't remember a single truly meaningful moment, not because you were too busy, but because nothing changed. You didn't move forward. You didn't clearly fall behind either. You just repeated, like a clock that runs on time, but never actually goes anywhere. And the scariest part is, you start getting used to it. At first, you feel uncomfortable. You have thoughts like, what am I doing with my life? I could do better. But if you don't act, those questions begin to fade. Not because you found the answers, but because you stopped asking. You accept. You accept a life without growth. You accept a version of yourself below your true potential. And you call it stability. I used to deceive myself with that word. I told myself, I don't need to take risks. I don't need to change too much. Everything is still fine. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. Because humans are not born to stand still. You are born to grow, to become better, to explore your own limits. And when you don't do that, you are not just missing opportunities. You are slowly losing yourself. Not suddenly, but little by little. Like a small flame not extinguished immediately, it just weakens, until nothing is left. I remember once looking into the mirror and asking myself, is this who I want to become? And the answer didn't come right away. But that silence said everything. You don't need a clear answer to know you are heading in the wrong direction. You just need to feel it. A sense of emptiness, a disconnection from yourself, a kind of fatigue you cannot explain. That is the sign. Not a sign of failure, but a sign that you are living below your potential. And the ironic thing is, you can keep living like that for years. No one stops you. No one forces you to change. Life will not shout at you. It will just let you continue if you choose to. But every day, you repeat. You are reinforcing a version of yourself that you never consciously chose. You didn't decide to become that person. You just became through delay, through ease, through not doing the things you know you should do. And then one day, you no longer remember who you once wanted to become. That is when things become most dangerous. Not when you fail, but when you stop dreaming, stop wanting to change, stop feeling the need to be better. You just live and accept. And if you don't stop there, something else will begin to happen. Something deeper, quieter, but more destructive. You begin to lose respect for yourself. There is something you can lose without anyone else noticing. Not money, not opportunities, not relationships, but self-respect. And the dangerous part is, It doesn't disappear in a day. It leaves little by little. I used to think confidence came from how others see you. That if you had achievements, recognition, praise, you would feel good about yourself. But then I realized, real respect does not come from the outside. It comes from what you do when no one is watching, from whether you keep your promises to yourself, from whether you do what you know is right even when you don't feel like it. And every time you don't, a small part of you begins to change. No one sees it. No one knows. But you know when you say you'll wake up early, but then you turn off the alarm. You know when you say you'll start, but then you delay. You know when you say you'll try, but then you choose the easier path. Those things seem small, but they are not. Because every time you break a promise to yourself, you teach yourself something very dangerous. My words don't matter. And when you no longer believe your own words, you can no longer believe in yourself. That is how respect begins to disappear. Not with a shock, but with hundreds of moments where you betray yourself. I have been in that state before. On the outside, everything still looked fine. But inside, I no longer felt confident looking at myself. Not because I lacked ability, but because I knew I hadn't used it. I knew I could do better. I knew I could be more disciplined. I knew I could become a better version of myself. But I didn't. And do you know what happens when you live long enough in that state? You start lowering your standards. You no longer expect much from yourself. You no longer set big goals. Not because you don't want to, but because you no longer believe you can achieve them. You limit yourself. Not because the world limits you, but because you have lost belief in yourself. And that is one of the most painful things a person can experience. Not being doubted by others, but doubting yourself. I remember once, I was about to start something new. A good opportunity, a path I had thought about many times. But before I acted, a small voice appeared in my head. You won't follow through. And the frightening part was I couldn't argue with it, because it was right. It was right based on all the previous times when I didn't keep my word to myself. You see, confidence is not something you can fake. It is built from evidence. From the times you say and you do. From the times you don't want to but still do. And when that evidence does not exist, you have nothing to stand on. You begin to avoid challenges, avoid opportunities, avoid anything that might force you to face yourself. Because you don't want to confirm one more time that you are no longer the person you once believed you could become. That is when things become most dangerous. Not when you fail, not when you fall behind, but when you no longer believe in yourself. Because when that happens, you don't need anyone to stop you anymore. You will stop yourself. And if you continue down that path, something else will happen. Something deeper. You won't just lose respect. You will become a version of yourself that you once promised you would never become. And that is one of the hardest truths to accept. There is a moment in life that you cannot rewind. Not because you don't want to, but because you can't. I'm not talking about a major failure. Not an incident. Not a collapse. I'm talking about a realization very quiet. One day, you wake up and you understand. No one tells you. No event triggers it. It just comes. I remember one time sitting alone in the evening. No noise. No one around. Just me and the thoughts I had been avoiding for a very long time. And for the first time, I didn't run anymore. I looked straight at my life. At the years that had passed. At the opportunities I had lost. At the things I had delayed. And I understood something I had always tried to avoid before. I had time. I had opportunities. I had the ability. But I didn't act. Not because I didn't know. Not because I couldn't. But because I didn't have enough discipline to do it when it was still easy. And when you realize that, nothing loud happens. No crying. No emotional explosion. Just a very heavy silence. You sit there and you know that you cannot go back to your youth. You cannot return to the days when everything was still ahead of you. You cannot go back to the moments when just one different decision would have changed everything. And the most painful part is, you cannot redo it. You can start from now, yes, but you cannot start over from the beginning. You cannot get time back. You cannot erase the years that have passed where you didn't live up to your potential. That is when you understand, discipline is not as hard as having to face this. Waking up early is not as hard as waking up every day, carrying the feeling that you let time pass in vain. Working when you don't want to is not as hard as looking back and seeing that you didn't act when you could have. I once thought I could delay and pay the price later, but the truth is, that price never decreases. It only increases. With time, with each year, with every opportunity you miss. And at some point, You stop running from it. You are no longer busy enough to forget it. You no longer have enough distractions to cover it. There is only you and the truth. A very simple truth: you did not live up to your potential. And no one can change that. No one can go back for you. No one can fix what has already passed. Only you, standing there and accepting it. That is one of the most mature moments in a person's life. Not when you succeed, but when you face the truth without running. But what matters is, not everyone realizes this while they still have time to change. Many realize it when everything has gone too far, when they no longer have enough energy, no longer enough opportunities, no longer enough time. And that is why this realization can either save you or become the greatest pain of your life, depending on when it comes. I was lucky to realize it while there was still time, but not everyone is. And if you are hearing this, I want you to ask yourself one question. Are you realizing this early enough, or have you already started too late? Because that answer will determine the rest of your life. And now, let's talk about what all of this leads to. A very simple truth that very few people accept. Discipline has never been the hardest thing. The hardest thing is living with the consequences of not having it. After everything I have gone through, I realized a truth that I used to misunderstand. Discipline has never been the hardest thing. We talk about discipline as if it is a massive burden, as if waking up early, working without motivation, or refusing comfort are things beyond human endurance. But if you look closely, those things are only hard in the moment. The difficulty of discipline is short-term difficulty. You feel it when the alarm goes off in the morning. You feel it when you have to start while you're not ready. You feel it when you have to continue even when you want to stop. It's uncomfortable, but it ends. After an hour, you adapt. After a day, you're okay. After some time, it becomes who you are. But the cost of lacking discipline, it doesn't end. It doesn't come just once. It doesn't last only a morning. It follows you every day, in how you look at yourself, in how you feel about your life, in how you react when you see others move forward. I once thought I was avoiding difficulty when I delayed, but in reality, I was just trading one kind of difficulty for another. I avoided the difficulty of doing, only to live with the difficulty of not doing. And if you compare those two, one side is temporary discomfort. The other is lasting regret. One side is effort in the present. The other is pain in the future. Then the choice becomes very clear. But the irony is, most people don't see that comparison until it's too late. They only see the difficulty in front of them. They don't see the cost behind it. I used to be one of them. I looked at discipline and thought it was too harsh. I looked at ease and thought it was harmless, but I was wrong. Ease is not harmless. It only delays the cost. And when the cost comes, it doesn't ask if you're ready. It just appears, and you have to live with it every day, in your thoughts, in your emotions, in the way you look back at your life. And that is when you understand discipline is not something you should fear. It is something you should be grateful for, because it is one of the few things in life that gives you the power to choose the price you want to pay. You can pay with effort today, or pay with regret tomorrow. You can choose short-term discomfort, or choose long-term pain. You can choose to become better, or choose to stay and ask, what if? And no one can choose for you. Not circumstances, not other people, not your past, only you, right here, in this moment. I'm not saying discipline will be easy. It won't be. But I can tell you this. It is far easier than living a life where you know you didn't give your best. It is far lighter than carrying regret every day. And it is far more valuable than any temporary comfort. If you understand that, you will no longer ask, how can I be more disciplined? You will start asking, what price am I willing to pay? Because life always demands a price. The only question is, do you pay it now or later? One thing I want you to remember, not just today, but for the rest of your life. You cannot avoid the price. You can only choose when to pay it. Discipline is not a punishment. It is a choice. A choice to endure difficulty now, to avoid deeper pain later. Throughout this journey, we have talked about things most people don't want to face. Procrastination, ease, repetition, regret. Not to make you feel bad, but to help you see more clearly the path you are on, more clearly the cost of small choices, more clearly the person you are becoming. Because every big change starts with a realization, not a perfect plan, not explosive motivation. Just a moment where you stop and tell yourself, I'm not going to continue like this anymore. You don't need to change everything in one day. You just need to start. One right decision, one small action. One time you do what you know you should do even when you don't want to. And then you repeat. That is how you rebuild yourself. That is how you regain respect for yourself. That is how you become the person you once believed you could be. If these words resonate with you, give this video a like. Subscribe if you want to continue this journey, not with me, but with yourself. And if you can share this video with someone you know who also needs to hear this. Before you leave, I want to ask you one question. What price are you choosing for your life? Effort today or regret tomorrow? Leave your answer, because sometimes one honest answer to yourself can change everything. And remember, discipline is the bridge between goals and achievement. I truly appreciate you staying until the end of this video.